Hello, I'm Emorph. I make games so you can play games, although this time we are reading. It is no secret that I like classics, and today we're reading Miss Marjoribanks by Margaret Oliphant. Some quick PSAs. I have originally chosen this book because I have a physical copy of it. However, when I was looking through and finding a digital copy so you can follow along, it turns out every reprint PDF of the book, or even just the ones that you can find on websites at times, because it is a very old book and it's such you can, well, find it for free. It's in the public domain, right? Um, has completely different places where a page starts and ends because the layout and the font changes. So while I wanted to just read along and add a few of the page turning sounds, it doesn't look like I will be able to do that. I will be reading along nonetheless. Um, I have read about a chapter of this beforehand because it is one of the books that I enjoyed and then wanted to, finish very well. I really want to finish it. Um, and partially it's because it's just like I'll probably mention it a bit later again, and I hope I do remember. But the main character and her father are both very stereotypically autistic for their gender, and I find that absolutely marvelous. It's just so good. Also, the reading of old classics in general, they're written in such an interesting way and with such interesting characters compared to modern things tend to turn into like stereotypes, while the classics is what we get as surviving literature, and it oftentimes can be very profound when you read them, I suppose. Although, honestly, I just find it interesting because it's less easy to predict as well, since it was literally written in a different time. This is a 19th century classic, which means it was written in the 1800s. And yeah, so we'll be beginning with chapter 1. Hello. Miss Marjoribanks lost her mother when she was only 15, and when, to add to the misfortune, she was absent at school, she could not have it in her power to soothe her dear mamma's lost moments, as she herself said. Words are sometimes very poor exponents of such an event, but it happens now and then, on the other hand, that a plain intimation expresses too much and suggests emotions and suffering which, in reality, have but little, if any, existence. Miss Marjoribanks, poor lady, had been an Merce. I have no idea how to pronounce different things. Miss and Miss is an R. It does annoy me quite well, but this is her mother it's referring to. Marjoribanks, poor lady, had been an invalid for many years. She had grown a little peevish in her loneliness, not feeling herself of much account in this world. There are some rare natures that are content to acquiescence in the general neglect and forget themselves when they find themselves forgotten, but it is unfortunately much more usual to take the plan adopted by Miss Marjoribanks, who devoted all her powers during the last 10 years of her life to the solace and care of that poor self which other people neglected. The consequence was that when she disappeared from her sofa, except for the more physical fact that she was no longer there, no one except her maid, whose occupation was gone, could have found much a difference. Her husband, it is true, who had somewhere, hidden deep in some secret corner of his physical organization, the remains of a heart, experienced a certain sentiment of sadness when he re entered the house from which he had gone away forever. But Dr. Oh, my bad. From which he had gone away forever. But Dr. Marjoribanks was too busy a man to waste his feelings on mere sentiment. His daughter, however, was only 15 and had floods of tears at her command, as she was natural at that age. All the way home she revolved the situation in her mind, which was considerably enlightened by novels and popular philosophy, for the lady at the head of Miss Marjoribanks' school was a devoted admirer of Friends in Council, and was fond of bestowing that work as a prize with pencil marks on the margin, so that Lucilla's mind had been cultivated and was brimful of the best sentiments. She made up her mind on her journey to a great many virtuous resolutions, for in such a case as hers, it was evidently the duty of an only child to devote herself to her father's comfort, and become the sunshine of his life, as so many young persons of her age have been known to become in literature. Miss Marjoribanks had a lively mind and was capable of grasping all the circumstances of the situation at a glance. Okay, it is at this point that I really need to point out the okay, there's two things that happened here within just the first page, and I absolutely love them. One of which is that we get the image of Dr. Marjoribanks to her father, and we don't get a lot of it yet, but we'll get a lot more of it. We can say that he's very devoted to his work, like in a very intense kind of way, I suppose, where it takes priority over most anything else in his life. And then we get the vision of Miss Marjoribanks by the name of, where was it that she was mentioned? Young Lucilla, I believe, is her name here. And she has done so on her way, like walk in between as she's going through this. The decision that she's gone through is I will copy the behaviors of others I see in literature because that's the way I'm supposed to behave. It's very common in autistic women because it's and just like I think anybody that's autistic and extroverted a lot of the time, because not being able to read social cues or understand them very well is common. There's a few different names because there's a few different symptoms that come like as part of this. But a very common thing for autistic women and girls to do is to like mimic situations they have seen like from TV or literature or otherwise in general. So some practice facial expressions. Some will, so she's decided here that, oh, okay, this situation has happened. I must do A, B, and C in order to, well, to be normal in this. That's her way of like coping because she's seeing what's happening, I suppose. So there's that. The other part is that I do find that the late Miss Marjoribanks behavior is very reminiscent of those who are grieving their age as well, which I think is quite interesting because I know a few people who are quite old who are also in that same mindset, and it's very hard to get them out of it. But nonetheless, you should honestly try a lot of the time. It can be very difficult, and so that's what she's faced at the last little bits of her life. But yeah, so young Miss Marjoribanks here is emulating behavior from books, which is just a very autistic experience, and I find that very cool. Like as a representation, it's so good. Let me adjust it so it's in the middle. Yes, there we go. Thus, between the outbreaks of her tears for her mother, it became apparent to her that she must sacrifice her own feelings and make a cheerful home for Papa, and that a great many changes would be necessary in the household. Changes which went as so far as even to extend to the furniture. Miss Marjoribanks sketched to herself, as she lay back in the corner of the railway carriage, with her veil down, how she would wind herself up to the duty of presiding at her papa's dinner parties, and charming everybody by her good humor and brightness and devotion to his comfort, and how, when it was all over, she would withdraw and cry her eyes out in her own room, and be fond in the morning, languid and worn out, but always heroical, ready to go downstairs and assist at dear papa's breakfast, and keep up her smiles for him till he had gone out of his patience gone out to his patients, as he is a doctor, so his craft here is, well, a literal doctor, not like a doctor of sciences. But yeah. Altogether, the picture was a very pretty one, and considering that a great many young ladies in deep mourning put force upon their feelings in novels, and maintain a smile for the benefit of the unobservant male creatures whom they have the charge, the idea was not at all extravagant, considering that Miss Marjoribanks was but 15. She was not, however, exactly the kind of figure for the mise en scene. When her schoolfellows talked of her to their friends, for Lucilla was already an important personage at Mount Pleasant, the most common description they gave her was she was a large girl, and there was a great truth in the adjective. She was not to be described as a tall girl, which conveys an altogether different idea, but she was large in all particulars, full and well developed, with somewhat large features, not at all pretty as yet, though it was known in Mount Pleasant that somebody had said that such a face might ripen into beauty and become grandiose. For anything anybody could tell, Miss Marjoribanks was not vain, but the word had taken possession of her imagination, as was natural, and solaced her much when she made the painful discovery that her gloves were half a number larger and her shoes a hairbreadth broader than those of any of her companions. But the hands and feet were both perfectly well shaped, and being at the same time well clothed and plump, were much more presentable and pleasant to look upon than the lean, rudimentary schoolgirl hands with which they were surrounded. To add to these excellences, Lucilla had a mass of hair which, if it could but have been cleared a little in its tint, would have been golden, though at present it was nothing more than tawny and curly to exasperation. She wore it in large thick curls, which did not, however, float or wave, or do any of the graceful things which curls ought to do, for it had this aggravating quality that it would not grow long, but would grow ridiculously, unmanageably thick, to the admiration of her companions, but to her own despair, for there was no knowing what to do with these short but ponderous locks. So we get that she's Honors Girl, which I think is also very neat to have a protagonist as such. And it being, I don't think it's an objectively like looked down upon fact in the novel, which I quite like. Like it's another part of her well-being and upbringing and what makes her different to her peers. But I think it can also show in some of her personality because you can see that she's got a flair for dramatic, and I think that also can make a large personality in a way, you know. So not a physical connection as much as the well association or a metaphor, you know. You get a quick one. Let's do our media literacy thing. And the other one is honestly, I quite relate to the locks thing. I used to have straight hair, and then at one point it began to curl, and now it doesn't really grow long, but it just curls further, and I find it quite nice. It's good to have like the image of her that is contrasted with realism in a way, you know, because she reads a lot of those books, and so she has an idea of what life's supposed to look like and what a young lady's supposed to look like and do in order to be perceived as successful, like a main character of her life or somebody else's. And there's the odds of it where her own, you know, the way that she is or just happens to be is more real compared to it, and I quite enjoy that because I think there's a lot of contrast in the book. But yeah, I quite like that we have this like curly-haired blonde character with when it says they could have been golden but were instead tawny, it kind of refers to a dirty blonde color. I think probably similar to like a Tony Mouse, if you can imagine. But yeah, these were the external characteristics of the girl who was going home to be a comfort to her widowed father and meant to sacrifice herself to his happiness. In the course of her rapid journey, she had already settled upon everything that had to be done, or rather, to speak truly, had rehearsed everything. Again, I'm telling you, that's like the thing I mentioned earlier about how autistic women, like, and young girls tend to, like, rehearse the thing as, like, because it's hard to gauge social cues. And a lot of the time, when you're faced with these social cues you can't read, you don't know how to act. And so young girls usually have a lot of pressure to fit into society, and because of that, to fit that pressure where they do not normally have the ability to do so nearly as much as their peers, they rehearse and prepare and try to overcompensate through planning, or just like simple practice, and hope that it brings itself in. And that's quite lovely. So very, very autistic experience right there. According to the habit already acquired by quick mind, can I also mention she is noted here several times to be smart and clever, and that's also, if we're going by the like I hate to say, but the Asperger model of autism, I suppose, that's also like another point to it, because again, it is a spectrum, and part of that spectrum can often be being very good at recognizing and applying patterns, and just that's where a quick mind can come in. You know, being smart, I suppose. Not everyone, obviously, but it's a spectrum nonetheless. Just how not all autistic people have difficulty with social cues, but some will have difficulty with sensory things and other things like that. Acquired by a quick mind, a good deal occupied with itself. Oh, I love that because it kind of says that she thinks of herself and what she's doing a lot. Just of herself in general, I think is the vibe over here. First, she meant to fall into her father's arms, forgetting with that singular facility of overlooking the peculiarities of others which belongs to such a character, that Dr. Marjoribanks was very little given to embracing, and that a hasty kiss on her forehead was the warmest caress he had ever given his daughter, and then to rush up to the chamber of death and weep over dear mamma. And to think I was not there to soothe her last moments, Lucilla said to herself with a sob, and with feelings sufficiently real in their way. After this, the devoted daughter made up her mind to come downstairs again, pale as death, but self-controlled, and devote herself to Papa. Perhaps, if great emotion should make him peerless, as such caress cases had been known, Miss Marjoribanks would steal into his arms unawares, and so surprise him into weeping. All this went briskly through her mind, undeterred by the reflection that tears were as much out of Doctor's way as embraces. And in this mood, she sped swiftly along in the inspiration of her first sorrow, as she imagined, but in reality to sever her first disappointment, which was of a less soothing character than that mild and manageable grief. When Miss Marjoribanks reached her home, her mother had been dead for 24 hours, and her father was not at the door to receive her as she had expected, but by the bedside of a patient in extremity, who could not consent to go out of the world without a doctor. This was a sad reversal of her intentions, but Lucilla was not the woman to be discounted. She carried out the second part of her program without either interference or sympathy, except from Miss Marjoribanks' mind, a maid who had some hopes from the moment of her arrival. I can't bear to think as I'm to be parted from you all, miss, sobbed the faithful attendant. I've lost the best missus as I ever was, and I shouldn't mind going after her. Whenever anyone gets good friend in this world, they're first to be took away, said the weeping handmaiden, who naturally saw her own loss in the most vivid light. Ah, Alice, cried Marjoribanks, reposing her sorrow in the arms of the anxious attendant. We must try to be comfort to poor papa. With this end, Lucilla made herself very troublesome to the sober-minded doctor during those few dim days where the faint and daily lessening shadow for Miss Marjoribanks was removed altogether from the house. Shadow being, well, her death and corpse and all that. That. When a sad ceremony had taken place and the doctor returned, by sad ceremony it obviously means the funeral, and the doctor returned, serious enough, heaven knows, to the great house, where the faded helpless woman who had notwithstandingly been his love and his bride in other days lay no longer on the familiar sofa. The crisis arrived which Miss Marjoribanks had rehearsed so often, but after quite a different fashion. The widower was tearless, indeed, but not from excessive emotion. On the contrary, a painful heaviness possessed him when he became aware of how little real sorrow was in his mind, and how small an actual loss was this loss of his wife, which bulked before the world as an event of just as much magnitude as the loss, for example, which poor Mr. Lake, the drawing master, was the same moment suffering. It was even sad, in another point of view, to think of a human creature passing out of this world and leaving so little trace that she had ever been there. As for the pretty creature whom Dr. Marjoribanks had married, she had vanished into thin air years and years ago. Those thoughts were heavy and perhaps even more overwhelming than the grief which develops love to its highest point of intensity. But such were not precisely the kind of reflection which could be solaced by paternal attendrissement, over a weeping and devoted daughter. It may, and the weather was warm from the season, but Lucilla had caused the fire to be lighted in the large, gloomy library where Dr. Marjoribanks sat in the evenings, with the idea that it would be a comfort to him. And, for the same reason, she had ordered tea to be served there instead of the dinner, for which her father, as she imagined, could have little appetite. When the doctor went into his favorite seclusion, tired and heated and sad, for even on the day of his wife's funeral, the favorite doctor of Carlingford had patience to think of. The very heaviness of his thoughts gave warmth to his indignation. He had longed for quiet and the coolness and the solitude of his library, apart from everybody, and when he found it radiant with firelight, tea set on table, and Lucilla crying by the fire in her new crepe, the effect upon the temper, by no means perfect, may be imagined. So, before we move a little bit further with it, I would like to point out that the doctor feels less guilt here, which could be because he doesn't quite recognize the emotion. Um, and the reason I say that is because he feels a lot of guilt about it. He does feel a lot of grief for his patients, as we can see here also. So it's likely, I think, that he doesn't recognize the emotion because it's not the same as having somebody lost in your arms, I suppose. That, and also that he's mourning a person that she was, but again, something else is on his mind, I suppose. It's not. I don't. It's clearly said that she's not his like biggest loss there, I suppose, in this way. Um, but he did care about her at least once upon a time, and he feels very guilty about it not being the case now. But it's not something that he can seek comfort from his daughter when she's acting overly emotional with it, and he's not a particularly emotional looking man by it. It seems like his grief is a very dull thing in his chest, as opposed to something sharp and angry or, well, crying, as Miss Marjoribanks at the moment is trying to portray onto him. So it would be insensitive of him to, do so to her, not to mention, I don't think he can see how she could be a help of him in that kind of regard. So there's a bit of miscommunication there, I suppose. But as we can see here, there's not an opportunity for that to happen properly, as when he needs most, his way of coping with all of the stress of his daily life and this on top of it would be in silence and alone. And her idea of how he should be coping does not align, and actually does the exact opposite of helpful. So, as such, the unfortunate man my bad, threw both the windows wide open and rang the bell violently, and gave instant orders for the removal of unnecessary fire and the tea service. It was a hot day too, like a very warm one, so you don't want the fireplace to be lit. It's quite funny because you'd think in literature a lot of the time, the reason they'd say like, oh, put a fire on when someone's screaming or whatever, in that kind of situation, is to symbolize, like, the cold of it would symbolize that the situation is rather cold and uncomfortable and sad. And so putting on a fire would be, again, a metaphor for making somebody feel warm and welcome and maybe a little bit, uh, like, I guess a bit capable of moving on, maybe. No longer stuck in ice. Um, but she took it quite literally, which again is also very common in autistic people to take things quite literally. Um, and so she decided to put on a real fire because that would be a comfort, because it says it would be a comfort. But in reality, that was very poorly scheduled because it was already warm physically outside. So that was not quite it. Let me know when the dinner's ready, he said in a voice like thunder. And if Miss Marjoribanks wants a fire, let it be lighted in the drawing room. Lucilla was so much taken by surprise by the sudden overthrow of her program that she submitted, as a girl of much less spirit might have done, and suffered herself and her fire and her tea things to be dismissed upstairs, where she wept still more at sight of dear Mamma's sofa, and where Alice came to mingle her tears with those of her young mistress, and to beg dear Miss Lucilla, for the sake of her precious Else, and her dear papa, to be persuaded to take some tea. On the whole, Master stood lessened in the eyes of all the household by his ability to eat his dinner, and his resentment at having his habitues disturbed. Yes, so, you know how I mentioned that he's also autistic earlier, right? So where she is tempted to, when she doesn't know her social cues, she overcompensates with, rehearsing for them. He doesn't see social cues and he just straight up ignores them. So in this regard, his comfort was, taken out. And despite everything, his first reaction is to take care of his comfort, which is a reactionary thing, I suppose, here. Um, but in doing so, he didn't see the social significance of being at least more polite with the other grieving members of your household while they're going through it. Um, because again, you can't quite read the significance of it um, in that same way, or why it should disturb his peace when they could be coping somewhere else. It's like a logic thing, I suppose. Again, some autistic people have a lot of trouble with identifying their emotions or even with expressing them to begin with. And so it comes out in this kind of very reactive manner. Again, keyword on some. There's a spectrum of different symptoms. But yeah, and so now, as a result of this, the maid, whom I can see as, I don't, mm, so the maid is like, well, how could you, be so mean to either of us when we're grieving? Um, and so is Lucilla, although for her it's honestly partially more because his plans didn't follow her script, and so now she's annoyed in the same ways that he was annoyed when he planned to go into a quiet study and found it instead loud and too hot and full of things he doesn't want there. So I think that's quite cool as a parallel reflection, looking at this through an autistic lens, The men would eat and drink if we was all in our graves, said the indignant cook, who indeed had a real grievance, and the outraged sentiment of the kitchen was avenged by a bad and hasty dinner, which the doctor, though generally very particular, swallowed without remark. Yes, another. So when it comes to another thing, how I mentioned sensory issues earlier? So that can result in a lot of autistic people being picky eaters. And here the doctor is very particular. Um, Although this time he at least, ate it all without having any complaints, I suppose, which can be quite difficult with sensory issues. I will attest to that. A lot of the time, autistic kids are kind of forced to swallow down things, and it's very unpleasant, and no wonder people would throw tantrum. It's the same of if you were told to swallow a rock. It's not pleasant. Um, so he's very particular. The cooks are obviously enraged because Lucilla told them not to prepare dinner, and then he asked them for dinner, and so now they had to go through the entire 2 hour deal very quickly. But at least they were blessed in the fact that he was hungry enough to just eat it without particulars, or without being put off from it, I suppose. Still, quite interesting nonetheless. Let me scroll back so it's in center. There we go. And back into. About an hour afterwards, he went upstairs to the drawing room, where Miss Marjoribanks was waiting for him, much less at ease than she had expected to be. Though he gave a little sigh at the sight of his wife's sofa, he did not hesitate to sit down upon it. Again, so you know how I said about not being able to identify your emotions here? When I said so there's two parts to experiencing emotions, at least. One of which is being able to identify them and know what they are and, express them consciously, I suppose. And the other one is sort of treating your emotions as a symptom in a way. If you're angry, your face might get hot, and that's because it's turning red because you're so angry and the blood is rushing. But not noticing it or not noticing the correlation between the two can lead one to believe that they're emotionless when in reality that's not the case. And so that kind of thing can happen with autistic individuals a lot. And so that's what I think happens to him. Because he does give a side of herself for her, but he doesn't quite understand what or why. It's just a reaction comes out before he can identify to an emotion, and he doesn't really do the identifying it to an emotion part, first of all. And so since he doesn't understand that what he's feeling there is sadness and grief, his gut reaction is to simply act as he would have if he was not feeling either of those things, which honestly is not often helpful to yourself, but nonetheless, well, sometimes it can be, but not often. So that is what happened. It can also, as you can imagine, come off as very, how do I say this, heartless of him, though, which is partially the painted picture that we're getting here as the viewer. But let's go on before we continue. He did not hesitate to sit down upon it, and even to draw it a little out of its position, which, as Lucilla described afterwards, was like a knife going into her heart. There's the dramatic parts of this, and the parts where I think it's mostly the dramatics, honestly, because we here have it specified that Lucilla described it afterwards. All the time, this book, I do want to draw the attention to it. It says, as Lucilla described afterwards, which means she's dramatizing the story later because she's known to be dramatic or socialized, right? This is not something that she's feeling in the moment, because if she was feeling it in the moment, they would have described it in that manner. We often see here descriptions happen in past tense or even present tense. For example, when a doctor has felt sad. So they could have described it as Lucilla being sad, and then followed up by this line, but they chose not to. This is an important point we see of different devices used to portray different ideas. So, not taking it at face value, taking it at what it's written as. Though, indeed, she had herself decided already, in the intervals of her tears, that the drawing room furniture had got very faded and shabby, and that it would be very expedient to have it renewed for the new reign of use and energy which was about to commence. Again, can I just point this out a little bit? I know I'm stuffing like every line, but I think it's very useful to know in general. That's the discussion part of the book, and it's much better to do it this way. So when it comes to autism in men and women, there's a bit of a difference in diagnostic criteria sometimes because of the ways it presents itself. But at the core, it can still very much overlay and be the same, right? So wherein Lucilla and her father both don't read social cues, and then they respond to that differently by her father simply ignoring their existence, and Lucilla herself over-preparing for them instead. The low part of that scale and the high part of that scale. Similarly here, Lucilla thinks in a very similar way to her father's acting, where her father is moving the furniture. Lucilla is also already thinking of, how we should probably change the furniture nonetheless. It is, I like that parallel. It's quite similar, though she's expressing outwards partially what she feels she needs to express, but she's not really processing it either, just like he doesn't. And so it ends to the same kind of acts and means, just internally instead. It's not one of those that's visible externally at first glance, and so that's quite nice. As for the doctor, though, Miss Marjoribanks thought. As for the doctor, though Miss Marjoribanks thought him insensible, his heart was heavy enough. Yes, see, here, we have how they act, and then we have how they actually are. His heart is heavy. I will just go through the next part, though. His wife had gone out of the world without leaving the least mark of her existence, except in that large girl whose spirits and forces were unbounded, but whose discretion at the present moment did not seem much greater than her mother's. Instead of thinking of her as a comfort, the doctor felt himself called upon to face a new and unexpected embarrassment. It would have been satisfaction to him just then to have been left to himself and permitted to work on quietly as his profession, and to write his papers for the Lancet, and to see his friends now and then when he chose, For Dr. Marjoribanks was not a man who had any great need for sympathy by nature, or who was at all addicted to demonstrations of feeling. Consequently, he drew his wife's sofa a little further from the fire, and took his seat on it soberly, quite unaware that by so doing he was putting a knife into his daughter's heart. Mm-hmm. Right. I hope you have had something to eat, Lucilla, he said. Don't get into that foolish habit of flying to tea as a man flies to a dram. It's more innocent stimulant, but it's the same kind of intention. I'm not so much against the fire. It has always kind of cheerful look. I like to see this as him trying to make like amends to his daughter this way. Um, like in his own way, he's acknowledging the fire that she's lit up, both beforehand in the study and here, and he's trying to compliment her in it, and I suppose he's trying to be a bit of a comfort to her while also remaining a stern father. Similarly, because tea, and he's a doctor, and there's caffeine in that, I suppose, because this is written in Britain, I believe. Um, so I love that he cares enough to talk her through it in his own way, because he could have just coldly sat there and not talked to her at all, or could have pointed out the issues that he's had with her, and that would have been very painful for her, I think. You don't want to be the one insulting him, right? For no bad reason. So he could have been a bad father here. He could have been a bad person here too, but he tried his best with it, even though he doesn't quite understand it. In some ways that she doesn't quite understand, but she's emulating behavior as opposed to, you know, acting in a more genuine manner in the ways that he does, I suppose. Both have their flaws in a way. He's probably having a much easier time though, because trying to emulate behavior as part of masking is usually very tiring. So it's something that a lot of people get burnt out doing, to just like try and fit in for the sake of not being singled out. Oh, Papa, cried his daughter, with a flood of indignant tears. You can't suppose I want anything to look cheerful this dreadful day. I'm far from blaming you, my dear, said the doctor. It is natural you should cry. I'm sorry I did not write for my sister to come, who would have taken care of you, but I dislike strangers in the house at such a time. However, I hope, Lucilla, you will soon feel yourself able to return to school. Occupation is always the best remedy, and you will have your friends and companions. Papa! Cried Miss Marjoribanks. I do like he's trying to be a good father, and he's going here from his special doctor interest with it. He's like, yeah, this is good for you. You should do that. Sorry for the background noise. I don't know that when I'm excited, I suppose. And then here he says he does apologize to her in general. So I'm sorry, and specifically he's referring to not getting his sister to come over, because then, well, maybe she could have comforted her more, better, all accounts. But he doesn't dislike strangers in the house at such a time, which could be something about his grief. But I also think it could be interpreted about um, his general, like, there's a few things that are particular to autistic people, and it's very much to each individual. And one of them could be that he just doesn't like strangers in his house because of that, because he can't, like, he feels uncomfortable. So there's a particularly there. But yeah. And then she summoned courage and rushed up to him and threw herself in her clouds of crepe on the carpet at his side. And it may here be mentioned that Lucilla had seized the opportunity to have her morning made long, which had been the desire of her heart, baffled by Mamma and governess for at least a year. Papa! She had exclaimed with fervor, raising to him her tear-stained face and clasping her fair plump hands. Oh, don't send me away. I was only a silly girl the other day, but this has made me a woman. Though I can never, never hope to take dear Mamma's place and be all that she was to you. Still, I feel I can be comfort to you if you let me. You shall not see me cry any more. I it's quite it's I find it's just funny. It's great, you know. So she's going forward with her script, obviously. Uh, it's quite humorous. No one said anything about sending her away. No. But usually in like the dramas that she would be reading, um, there's like young YA novels or whatnot of her time, the young girls in the grieving would be sent away to like a boarding school of their own or somewhere far away for whatever reason, dramatics. And that's not happening, but I find it very funny. Cried Lucilia with energy, rubbing away her tears. I will never give way to my feelings. I will ask for no companions, nor anything. As for pleasures, that is all over. Oh, Papa, you shall never see me regret anything, or wish for anything. I will give up everything in the world to be comfort to you. This address, which was utterly unexpected and drove Dr. Marjoribanks to despair. He said, Get up, Lucilla. But the devoted daughter knew better than to get up. She hid her face in her hands and rested her hands upon her mother's sofa, where the doctor was sitting, and the sobs for the emotion which she meant to control henceforward echoed through the room. It is only this once I cannot help it, she cried. When her father found that he could neither soothe her nor succeed in raising her, he got up himself, which was the only thing left to him, and began to walk about the room with hasty steps. Her mother, too, had possessed this dangerous faculty of tears, and it was not wonderful if the sober-minded doctor, roused for the first time to consider his little girl as a creature possessed of individual character, should recognize, with a thrill of dismay, the appearance of the same qualities which had worried his life out. My bad. Worried. Worried his life out, and he brought his youthful affections to an untimely end. Oh, that's sad. So earlier he mentioned about how she's the only thing left over of his wife, and that's a heavy thought in itself, I suppose. Um, and I do very much think it's like he's at a loss. He doesn't know what to do here at all. Hence his pacing about. He doesn't know how to help her, and he's overwhelmed with the tears, and it reminds him. He didn't see Lucilla as her own person yet because he's fallen into the character of seeing children as just that children that you should rear into one form or another without any individuality of their own. And one of the reflections within that archetype that he's seeing of her is that, oh, this is a part of her mother, but also this is the part of her mother that had made him fall out of love a bit. That was over the years we had seen her there quite depressed, and so in her crying, he couldn't know what to do, and this reminded him of this exact situation. Oh, quite sad. Now, where were we? Lucilla was, it is true, as different from her mother as summer from winter, but Dr. Marjoribanks had no means of knowing that his daughter was only doing her duty by him in his widowhood, according to a program of filial devotion resolved upon in accordance with the best models some days before. So again, we know that it's not because just to reiterate that it's because he doesn't know her well enough, I suppose, in a way, to not compare her otherwise to that particular aspect of his dead wife. Anyway, accordingly, when her sobs had ceased, her father returned and raised her up, and not unkindly, and placed her in her chair. In doing so, the doctor put his finger by instinct upon Lucilla's pulse. Notice how it has a U, and how English is evil, because why would you do that if it's pronounced with an O? Lucilla's pulse, which was sufficiently calm and regulated to reassure the most anxious parent, and then a furtive and then a furtive, momentary smile gleamed for a single instant around the corners of his mouth. That's lovely. That's so lovely. I do, like, at times enjoy that family dynamic for this reason. Um, you know, so like as a doctor, as a good father, he raises her up once she's done with what he can't help with. Kindly puts her in a chair. He's trying to take care of her, and as in like what's it called? And then I don't suppose instinct, but learned kind of behavior. Um, the kind of thing you see in Pavlov dogs. I forgot the reflex. Here we go. As a learned reflex, puts his finger on her pulse to, like, check if she's okay. Only to find that it's very calm because, in fact, she is acting out and she's not very much feeling it. So she's doing okay. And this is more of a dramatic thing. It kind of makes him smile to, realize this sort of thing. I do find it also as a very cool way of like to cope, because some people learn ways to gauge social cues based on like symptoms of others. That's where if you were like diagnosed early in your life, you might have experienced the memorizing of different faces chart to try and tell them apart, which is not a very good idea to begin with because neurotypical people use a lot of micro expressions and allistic people in general. So, micro expressions is something that's even more difficult to read, and it really gets messy very quickly. But similarly, some people will read it through, like, in his case, I guess the pulse, and that's a way to accommodate for his natural difficulty with telling these things apart. And that's also very lovely. I think that's part of what makes him such a good doctor, where he falls short on the social side. He clearly makes up for in his special interest and skill, and with similar things like this pulse thing that allows him to, even though he couldn't read the social cues themselves, he can now understand what that means from a medical standpoint and allow his clients the comfort they need, which is just, it's great. I think, at least mostly within theory at the moment. I think we do get more of it later, though. "It is very good of you to propose sacrificing yourself for me," he said, "and if you would sacrifice your excitement in the meantime, that's wrong. And if you could sacrifice your excitement in the meantime and listen to me quietly, it would really be something. You're only 15, Lucilla, and I have no wish to take you from school just now. Wait till I have done. Your poor mother is gone, and it is very natural you should cry. But you were a good child to her on the whole, which will be a comfort to you. We did everything that could be thought of to prolong her days, and when that was impossible, to lessen what she had suffered. And we have every reason to hope," said the doctor, as indeed was accustomed to say in the exercise of his profession to the mourning relatives, "that she is far better off now than if she had been with us. When that is said, I don't know that there is anything more to add. I'm not fond of sacrifices either one way or another, and I have great objection to anyone making a sacrifice for me." "But, papa, it would be no sacrifice," said Lucilla, "if you would only let me be a comfort to you." So, couple more points here. This is like part of the reason that I really love this book, right? And so I really want to share it. But as I was saying, here in his profession, right? You remember how I mentioned earlier? Partially, I think it is just like if he goes through enough patients, it kind of becomes an automatic response. But partially, it is also very helpful that he's sort of pseudo memorized this sort of thing the same way that she's memorized her lines. For him, it just took a lot longer. Probably because half the time he wasn't sure why he should be doing this until eventually it proved quite useful, I imagine. And hence, this memorized spiel. It's great. It's great. It's like a DSM-5 autistic study for them, both of them. It's so good. I also, okay, another thing, I usually read with feeling, but because these two are not speaking with feeling, except for when Miss Marjorie, is putting on a show where she tries to speak with feeling, I have to use a more flatter tone than I'm used to, which sometimes means that when I forget to do so, I over dramatize what isn't there, which isn't accurate to that character. But it's something that I'm improving, just for the sake of this particular one. This is just where it is, my dear, said the doctor, the steady doctor. I have been used to be left a great deal to myself, and I am not prepared to say that the responsibility of having you here without a mother to take care of you and all your lessons interrupted would not neutralize any comfort you might be, you see, said Dr. Marjoribanks, trying to soften matters a little. A man is what his habits make him, and I have been used to be left a great deal to myself. It answers in some cases, but I doubt if it would answer with me. Well, that's sweet. Again, he says he's explaining it why he is doing this, which is something you should totally do with children in general. By the way, because it helps. A lot of times they'll throw like big emotions because they don't know why, and this kind of can really put people on the same page, I suppose. So that's very useful, and also can like children are still their own individuals to a degree, and in order for them to grow and learn, you have to trust them to learn and grow and understand you, and you can only do that by communicating with them frequently enough. And then there was a pause in which Lucilla wept and stifled her tears in her handkerchief, with a warmer flood of vexation and disappointment than even her natural grief produced. Again, he's not like going to the script. She's not sure what to do with it. She kind of thinks that her performance is bad, hence why this is, and blames herself for not being good enough to comfort her papa, as she's expected should be the case, and like what he should be wanting. But he's trying to communicate this is not like, at all what he wants. he wants to continue being the way that he is, which is fair enough. Of course, Papa. If I can't be any comfort, I will go back to school, she sobbed, with a touch of sullenness which did not escape the doctor's ear. Yes, my dear, you will certainly go back to school, said the peremptory father. The epithets they use for this guy. It's just like the fourth one in a row, but I like that they don't repeat. I never had any doubt on the subject. You can stay over Sunday and rest yourself. Monday or Tuesday will be the time enough to go back to Mount Pleasant. And now you had better ring the bell and get somebody to bring you something, or I'll see to that when I go downstairs. It's getting late, and this has been a fatiguing day. I'll send you up some niggers, and I think you had better go to bed. It's so hard to not put any emotion in his voice. But he really doesn't. And I just like the way that he's communicating that a little bit. It's like, yeah, you should remember to eat, because that's really important. And if you don't, I'll be the good person enough to, send for it for you when I get that, after a certain period of time, which is measured in actions here, so when I go downstairs. That's so, I appreciate that personally. And with these commonplace words, Dr. Marjoribanks withdrew in a calm possession of the field. As for Lucilla, she obeyed him, and betook herself to her own room, and swallowed her needles and nagus. I don't actually know what that word is. I might search it up. Nagus with a sense not only of defeat, but of disappointment and mortification, which was very unpleasant. To go back again and be an ordinary schoolgirl, after the pomp and woe in which she had come away, was naturally a painful thought. She had ordered her mourning to be made long, and contemplated new furniture in the drawing room, and expected to be mistress of her father's house, which is to say, because the father is the master of the house, and since her mother's dead, should be the mistress of the house. So somebody in ownership or commanding the place. Not to speak of the still dearer privilege of being a comfort to him. And now, after all, her active mind was to be condemned over again to verbs and chromatic scales, though she felt within herself capacities so much more extended. So, one of the things about Miss Marjoribanks that we will know is that she has a penchant for leadership. Quite often, she thrives, like, I don't want to say she naturally thrives socially because that's clearly not the case. Um, but she does enjoy thriving socially quite a lot. That is something that she does. If some people enjoy being like the worker who does detailed crafts, and other people enjoy overseeing a picture and managing it, and so that is hers. So subjects that are not privy to that understimulate her, and she does not find interesting, right? So those kind of aspects of school she does not enjoy. I quite like the fact that she doesn't like studying verbs, but she does enjoy reading novels, which goes to say that it's not the language itself that she likes, not the language learning, not the reading itself, but the social dynamics she gets to learn from these novels, which, as we have established, are quite dramatic. Um, that's her way of learning about the world, and it's interesting to her because it involves these social dynamics, which is also within, like, I have some background in game development, right? And one of the research studies I did do was on what's called how different groups interact with video games. Like, what makes a video game that's inclusive for all, that's more likely to be joined by like one group or another. And a lot of the more female dominated games are those with social dynamics, um, where like the social dynamic is part of the gameplay, right? So, for example, something like CS:GO or other male-dominated games that are maybe single player do not have those social dynamics most of the time. You simply, like, each is for their own. And if you do communicate with the team, sure, that's like great and encouraged and whatever, but it's not a mechanic in itself. It's just an addition to your already made gameplay, as opposed to something where, let's say, like, I think there's like farm games, like let's say Cookie Run Kingdom, right, where you can make your own kingdom, um, and there is a mechanic for uh, fighting others or going onto their kingdoms and others in that, and so like it's a communication sort of thing, I suppose. It's quite good to like community-based things, so it's not particularly uncommon for that to be her special interest in a way. Um, that's something that she finds, and that's where he gives her a lot of feedback. That's, I think, tied to her, um, like her representation of autism is tied to her gender at the end of the day, which is neat. As I've mentioned, how those two are like two sides of the same autism gender coin in a way. Um, so here's how we tie it together, which is quite nice. Again, this is a spectrum, so not all autistic women are landing on her particular side of autistic women's spectrum, but she does fall within the stereotype of it, and I find that um, as a very good education point, you know? Mm. One moment, let me take a drink of my tea. Right. Miss Marjoribanks did not by any means learn by this defeat to take the characters of the other personae in her little drama into consideration when she rehearsed her pet scenes hereafter, for this is a knowledge slowly acquired. But she was wise enough to know when resistance was futile, and like most people of living imagination, she had a power of submitting to circumstances when it became impossible to change them. Very nice. So, as established earlier, um, she sees it as a personal failure of her performance more than the need to account for other people's personalities, and it is because you learn that a lot from trial and error with her. So knowledge slowly acquired, um, and just like in general when it comes to knowing people, but in this case that would be it. but she was wise enough to know when resistance is futile. The part about the creativity aspect is that a rigid mindset, a less creative one, when one sees failures, they will usually either push through in the exact same way they have started or give up. Versus in a creative mind, here it's implied that they seek to know when it stops them and then find it as an opportunity to go around it in some way, shape, or form. Another way of creative problem solving as opposed to simple problem solving by the book. And as such, we have this. Thus, she has. Thus, she consented to postpone her reign, if not with a good grace, yet still without foolish resistance, and retired with the full honors of war. She had already rearranged all the details, and settled upon all the means of possible preparing herself for what she called the charge of the establishment when her final emancipation took place, before she returned to school. "Papa taught me too young," she said, when she reached Mount Pleasant, "though it was dreadful to come away and leave him alone with only the servants. But, dear Miss Martha, you will let me learn all about political economy and things, to help me manage everything. For now that the dear Mamma is gone, there is nobody but me to comfort Papa." So, again, how I mentioned social dynamics and political economy is one of them. It's so good. I'm also so proud of her. I know that she's like partially doing it as like, oh well, I guess we can't be helpful this way, so we gotta be helpful another way. And this is usually what happens if Owen has to like take over her father's estate or something in his grief. So that's like part of it. But like the other part of it is just like a girl boss, honestly. I'm so proud of her. Go study, go become smart, go reach out to your teachers to improve. Oh, it's so good. I like that she's an active protagonist that like takes charge of her life, and we get to experience it. I really do, because I love the modern like books in general. Take protagonists and they're like, oh look, they're thrown around by life. Oh well, they have to do this for A, B, and C. Unless I suppose you are particularly into sci-fi, but even sci-fi only pretends to give the characters agency. Still, here we can kind of see the cause and effect later. It's so lovely. I'm so proud of her. It's so good. This is a moment that usually is understated. Like I think in modern literature, what they would have been is like, oh, somebody came to her and then offered her this, and then she done that. But like, she seeks them out and she does this. It's nice and refreshing. And by this means, Miss Marjoribanks managed to influence the excellent woman who believed in friends and counsel, and to direct the future tenor of her own education. See, you see what I mean? While, at least, in that one moment of opportunity, she had achieved long dresses, which was a visible mark of womanhood, and a step which could not be retraced. Oh. Chapter 2. Dr. Marjoribanks was so far from feeling the lack of his daughter's powers of consolation that he kept her at Mount Pleasant for 3 years longer, during which time it is to be supposed he managed to be comfortable after a benighted fashion. Good enough for a man of 50 who had come to an end of his illusions. To be sure, there were in the world, and even in good enough for a man of 50 who had come to an end of his illusions. To be sure, there were in the world, and even in Carlingford, kind women who would not have objected to take charge of the doctors and his establishment, and be comfort to him. But on the whole, it was undeniable that he managed tolerably well in external matters, and gave very good men's dinners, and kept everything in perfect order so far as it went. I again kept everything in perfect order. I like that. You're gonna hear me say very autistic a lot in this case. I'm not even gonna elaborate at this point. Just know it. another symptom. But yeah, he's doing really well. Naturally, the fairer part of existence was left out altogether in that grim, though well-ordered house. Again, he doesn't care for things to feel nice per se. He's a very practical person, I suppose. He has his matters that he tends to, and they're very structured, and so is his house. And when it comes to things that are like seasonal flowers and tables, anything else in that kind of way, don't care. But then he was only a man and a doctor and knew no better. And while the feminine part of Grange Lane regarded him with natural pity, not only for what he lacked, but for a still more sad defect, his total want of perception on the subject. Their husbands and fathers rather liked to dine with the doctor, and brought home accounts of sources which were enough to drive any woman to despair. On the account of, so they pitied him partially because he lost his wife, and partially because he didn't seem to even know to what's the particular words that they have used, not only for what he lacked, but for his still more sad defect, for a still more sad defect, his total want of perception of the subject. So in the way that like the lack of grieving, I guess, on his part of desire to be comforted by anybody, I think is the specific thing here. So they pity him for the fact that he's lost, and they pity him for not seeking out comfort also, which does sound like a bit of a like hypocritical thing to do, but it's fairly normal. So some of the ladies of Grange Lane, Miss Chilly, for example, who was fond of good living herself and liked, as she said, a little variety, laid siege to the doctor and did their best to coax his receipts out of him, but Dr. Marjoribanks knew better than that. He gave all the credit to his cook, like a man of sense, and as the functionary was known in Carlingford to be utterly regardless and unprincipled in respect to gravy beef and the materials for stock and consume, as some people called it, society was disinclined to exert its ordinary arts to seduce so great an artist from the kitchen of the indulgent master. So they have a very good cook, as we can see, and the cook has a reputation for being someone that you just is unshakable. So they didn't try to ask him for his recipes because they knew it wouldn't work. They tried with the doctor, but as a man of sense, he obviously said that he doesn't. That's not his business. That's the cook's. Gave him the credit, and B didn't give them anything either. So the husbands kept coming back to him because the food was really good. Much to the chagrin of their wives, who couldn't cook very well for it because they don't know what it is that the cook was doing to make it so special. Probably, but no, actually. No, okay. Moving on. And then there were other ladies who took a different tone. Dr. Marjoribanks, poor man, has nothing but his stable to take up his mind, said Miss Sintram, who had 6 children. I never heard that the heart could be nourished upon sauces, for my part, and for a man who has his children's future to think of, I must say I am surprised at you, Mr. Mr. Centum. As for young Miss Wooden, her reply was still more decisive, though milder in its tone. Poor cook! I'm so sorry for her, said the gentle young matron. Poor cook! I'm so sorry for her, said the gentle young matron. You know you always like something for breakfast, Charles, and then there is the children's dinner, and our lunch, and the servants' dinner, and that poor thing is worn out before she comes to what you call the great event of the day, and you know how angry you were when I asked for a kitchen maid for her, poor soul. The consequence of all this was that Dr. Marjoribanks remained unrivaled in Garage Lane, in this respect at least. When rumours arose in Carlingford of a possible second marriage for the doctor, and such rumours naturally arose 3 or 4 times in the course of the 3 years, the men of Garage Lane said, Heaven forbid! Or, no wife in the world could replace Nancy, said Colonel Chilly. So the Miss Chili is married to Colonel Chili. No, after that fervent aspiration, no one could put up with her. While on the other side, there were curious speculations afloat as to the effect upon the house, and especially the table, of the daughter's return. When a young woman came to be 18, it is difficult to keep her at school, and though the doctor had staved off the danger for the moment by sending Lucilla off along with one of her schoolfellows, whose family was going abroad to make orthodox acquaintance with all the Swiss mountains and all the Italian capitals, still that was plainly an expedient for the moment. And the new mistress to the house, which had got along so well without any mistresses, was inevitable, so that it cannot be denied Miss Marjoribanks Edward was regarded in Carlingford with as much interest and curiosity as she could have wished, for it was already known that the doctor's daughter was not a mild young lady, easy to be controlled, but on the contrary had all the energy and determination to have her own way, which naturally belonged to a girl who possessed a considerable chin and a mouth which could shut and tightly curling tresses, which were still more determined than she was to be arranged only according to their inclination. It was even vaguely reported that some passages of arms had occurred between Miss Marjoribanks and their redoubtable Nancy during the short and uncertain opportunities which were afforded by holidays, and the community, accordingly, regarded as an affair of almost municipal importance Lucilla's final return home. As for the young lady herself, though she was at school, she was conscious of having had a career not without importance, even during those 3 years of pupillage. Since the day when she began to read political economy with Miss Martha Blount, who, though the second sister, was the directing spirit of the establishment, Lucilla had experienced a certain influence upon the school itself, which was very satisfactory. Perhaps her course might be a little deficient in grace, but grace, after all, is but a secondary quality, and, at all events, Miss Marjoribanks went straight forward. You know how I mentioned that she's autistic in country social cues? She's autistic in country social cues. The straightforward thing is very common because it's hard to orient them when they're not intuitive. It really is. So she's known for it. Leaving an unquestionable wake behind her, and running down with indifference the little skiffs in her way. I also like that how this paints her in general, because we've already established that I'm quite proud of her, and there's quite good reason for it, right? But I'm pretty sure they didn't have autism as a diagnosis back then yet, right? Not quite anyway. But even with that in mind, the way that it doesn't paint her as bad for that specifically is nice. There is something to be said, but in general, I quite like it, you know? Yes, she is unique for A, B, and C, but it's not a bad thing for her. And that's neat. It's inspirational in a way, you know? Quite like it. She was possessed by nature of the kind of egotism, or rather egoism, which is predestined to impress itself, by its perfect reality and good faith, upon the surrounding world. So, because she believes in herself, it is bound to be something that others sort of believe in, because she's good-natured and honest about it, genuine, you know, in a way. Maybe not genuine and honest isn't quite the particular word. Sincere, there we go. So that sort of thing. Quite more common in general within acquiring positions of leadership, I suppose. Because people kind of sometimes most times want to get behind people who have this kind of inspiring attitude towards them, I think. And it's quite grand that she tries to be kind of it. There are people who talk of themselves and think of themselves, as it were, under protest, and with depreciation, not actually able to convince themselves that anybody cares. But Lucilla, for her part, had the calmest and most profound conviction that when she discussed her own doings and plans and clevernesses, she was bringing forward the subject most interesting to her audience as well as to herself. Yeah, I'm not going to say that they don't talk to her about her in like a bad manner, but in general, it's good. No, not this particular. So here's obviously what they're saying is, well, some people are the kinds of people who insult themselves or have their trouble with their mind doing so for them, I suppose. Um, she has no such trouble because she is confident in her egoism, I suppose, and that is nice. Just like this is a way to be calm, if nothing else, and that's quite good. But yeah, convictions and other things like that, quite grand. Such a conviction is never without its fruits. To be sure, there were always one or two independent spirits who revolted, but for the crowd, it soon became impressed with a profound belief in the creed which Miss Marjoribanks supported so firmly. This conviction of importance and value of her own proceedings made Lucilla, as she grew older, a copious and amusing conversationalist, a rank which few people who are indifferent to or do not believe in themselves can attain to. One thing she had made up her mind to as soon as she should return home, and that was to revolutionize society in Clarenford. It is true, and it's a rare thing people who do not believe in themselves achieve. I think and that's nice because, like, partially it's a thing of if you're she can't get discouraged if she believes in herself strongly, um, and so that's part of what makes her such a good conversation because she never stops conversing and improving that skill set. You know, that's good. I should probably stop translating this just so you can enjoy it in general, because it just says good things. I agree. Yeah, fair enough. And if they're not good things, they'd still agree nonetheless, because I understand that they're not good things, and also understand where the may not be truth in them, where the truth lies there, you know? On the whole, I think a way to mention this is there was a term a couple of years back about the cult of personality type of marketing strategy, which is kind of what this is. She talks about herself, and she does so confidently, and she does so often, and as such, that builds that kind of cult-like following of belief in her abilities. Whether or not it's justified is another thing in entirety, but it is not mentioned here. It is, it could be, because she does, put the work into becoming better at what it is that she wants to do. With, as we have seen with her, like taking charge of her schooling and other things like that. So, yeah, could be. On the whole, she was pleased with the success of the doctor's dinners, though a little piqued to think that they owed nothing to herself. But Lucilla, whose instinct of government was of the true despotic order, and who had no objection to stoop, if by means she could conquer, had no such disdains against Nancy as were attributed to her by the expectant audience of Carlingford. On the contrary, on the contrary, she was quite as much disposed as her father was to take Nancy for Prime Minister, for Miss Marjoribanks, though too much occupied with herself to divine the characteristic points of other people, had a sensible and thorough belief in those superficial general truths which most minds acquiesce in, without taking the trouble to believe. She knew, for example, that there was a great difference between the brilliant society of London or Paris, which appears in books, where women have generally the best of it, and can rule in their own right, and even the very best societies of a country town, where husbands are very commonly unmanageable and have a great deal more of their own way in respect to the houses they will or will not go to, than is good for the inferior branch of human family. For that inferior branch of the human family. Slay. I love Miss Marjoribanks, honestly. That's a diva. I read it again. That was amazing. I was not expecting to see that in a book that was written so long ago. It was also written by women, though, so that, you know, kind of makes sense. Men don't usually speak of themselves in that way, I suppose, in writing literature all the time. Although, there was the Decameron, but it requires a lot more understanding than this one, because it's a lot older and also translated from, I think, French originally. Although, correct me if I'm wrong. Um, in which the man did transcribe it, what apparently women have told him during the plague. And, you know, they talk. That, and I believe, actually, Shakespeare sometimes pulls things in a similar manner, but again, that's a whole reason why Shakespearean scholars exist. So that's not easy to understand either. But in this one, grand. And have a great deal more of their own way in respect to the house as they will or will not go to than is good for that inferior branch of the human family. Miss Marjoribanks had the good sense to see and appreciate these details, and she knew that a good dinner was a great attraction to a man, and that, in Carlingford at least, when these refractory mortals were secured, the wives and daughters would necessarily follow. Besides, as is not uncommon with women who are clever women and aware of the fact, Miss Marjoribanks preferred the society of men, and rather like to say so. Hmm. This is in this time period as established earlier, women can't really own things, right? They have other jobs, I suppose, in the community. But yeah, where taking church is normal, but like legally speaking, it's a bit different, right? Um, so, on part, this is a power move of her to prefer the company of people who have physical legal power. um, and on the other hand, it's also another thing that I should mention was autistic people. This is not necessarily common to autistic women to like, oh, hang out with guys more than girls. But I have heard at one point somebody mentioned that because of the differences in social dynamics between male friendships and female friendships and their importance between the two, uh, autistic women usually fall into the same level of like social dynamic as non-autistic men. I have heard that sentiment once upon a time. In which case, that would, that also kind of aligns. But yeah, let me move this back to the middle. There we go. With all these intentions in her mind, it may be imagined that she received coolly enough the invitation of her friend to join in the grand tour, and the ready consent given by her father when he heard of it. But even the grand tour was a tool which Lucilla saw how to make use of. That's great. Diva behavior. uh, so, obviously she's not happy with the fact that her return is delayed because her father was way too eager to send her away. But nonetheless, she goes, and there is always an opportunity in that. hence this. Nowadays, when people go everywhere, an untroubled woman would find it so much the harder to keep up with the role of a leader of society to which she had devoted herself, and she felt the depths of her heart, the endless advantage of her future conversation for the experience to be acquired in Switzerland and Italy. But she rejected with scorn the insinuation of other accidents that might occur on the way. Well, you will never come back again, Lucilla, said one of her companions. You will marry some enchanting Italian with a beautiful black beard and a voice like an angel, and he'll sing serenades to you and do all sorts of things. Oh, how I wish I was you. That may be, said Miss Marjoribanks, but I shall never marry an Italian, my dear. I don't think I shall marry anybody for a long time. I want to amuse myself. I wonder, by the way, if it would improve my voice to take lessons in Italy. Did I ever tell you of the Italian nobleman that was so very attentive to me that Christmas I spent at Sissy Vernon's? He was very handsome. I suppose they really are all very handsome, except, of course, the Italian masters. But I did not pay any attention to him. My object, my dear, and you know it, is to return home as well educated as possible to be a comfort to dear papa. Yes, dear Lucilla, said the sympathetic girl. And it is so good of you. But do tell me about the Italian nobleman. What did he look like? What did he say? Ah, as for what he said, that is quite a different matter, said Lucilla. But it is not what they say, but the way they say it. That is fun. I did not give him the least encouragement. As for that, I think a girl can always stop a man when she does not care for him. It depends on whether you intend him to commit himself or not. Miss Marjoribanks continued, and fixed her eyes meditatively but intently upon her friend's face. Whether I intend— Oh, goodness, Lucilla! How can you speak so? As if I ever intended anything, said her companion, confused yet flattered by the possibility, to which the elder sage answered calmly with all the composure in the world. No, I never supposed you did. I was thinking of myself, said Lucilla, as if, indeed, that was the only reasonable subject of thought. You know, I have seen a good deal of the world, one way and another, was going to spend the holidays, and I could tell you quantities of things. It is quite astonishing how much experience one gets. When I was at Midhurst at Easter, there was my cousin Tom, who was quite ridiculous. I declare he nearly brought things to an explanation. Funny, Fanny, which, of course, of all things in the world, I most wanted to avoid. Oh, but why, Lucilla? Cried Fanny, full of delight and wonder. I do so want to know what they say when they make explanations, as you call them. Oh, do tell me, Lucilla, why? My dear, said Miss Marjoribanks, a cousin of my own, and only 21, and reading for the bar. In the first place, my aunt would never have forgiven me, and I am very fond of my aunt. It's so nice to like all one's relations. I know some girls who can't bear theirs. And then a boy not much older than myself with nothing but what his mother pleases. Fortunately, he did not just say the words, so I escaped the time. But of course, I could understand perfectly what he meant. But, oh, Lucilla, tell me the words, cried the persistent questioner. Do, there's a darling. I'm quite sure you have heard them, and I should so like to know exactly what they say. Do they go down on their knees? Or do they try to take your hand, as they always do in novels? Or what do they do? Oh, Lucilla, tell me, there's a dear. Nonsense, said Lucilla. I only want you to understand that I am not likely to fall in any danger of the sort. My only ambition, Fanny, as I have told you often, is to go home to Carlingford, and be a comfort to dear papa. Yes, said Fanny, kissing her devoted companion. And it is so good of you, dear. But then you cannot go on all your life being a comfort to dear papa, said the intelligent girl, bethinking herself, and looking again with some curiosity in Lucilla's face. We must leave that to Providence, said Miss Marjoribanks, with a sense of paying a compliment to Providence in entrusting it with such responsibility. I have always been guided for the best Hesro. It has been Hesro. I have always been guided for the best Hesro, she continued, with an innocent and unintentional profanity which sounded so to her quality and equally innocent companion. And I don't doubt I shall be so till the end. From which it will be perceived that Miss Marjoribanks was of the numerous class of regionalists who keep up civilities with Haven, and pay all the proper attentions, and show their respect for the divine government in a manner befitting persons who know the value of their own approbation. The conversation dropped at this point, for Ursula was too important a person to be left to the undivided possessions of an inquisitive innocent like Fanny Middleton, who was only 16 and had never had even a flirtation in her own person. There were no Carlingford girls at Mount Pleasant, except for little Rose Lake, the drawing master's second daughter, who had been received on Dr. Marjoribanks' recommendation, and who heard the little children their geography and reading.
and gave them little lessons in drawing by way of paying for her own education. But then Rose was entirely out of Miss Marjoribanks' way, and could never count for anything in her designs for the future. The girls at Mount Pleasant were good girls on the whole, and were rather improved by the influence of Lucilla, who was extremely good-natured, and, so long as her superiority was dully acknowledged, was ready to do anything for anybody, so that Rose Lake was not at all badly off in her inferior position. She could be made useful too, which was a great point in her favor, and Miss Marjoribanks, who possessed by nature some of the finest qualities of a ruler, instinctively understood and appreciated the instruments that came to her hand. As for Rose, she had been brought up at the School of Design in Claringford, of which, under supervision of the authorities who, in these days, inhabited Marlborough House, Mr. Lake was the master. Rose was the pride of the school in the peaceable days before her mother died. She did not know much else, poor child, except novels, but her copies from the round filled her father with admiration, and her design for Honiton lace flaunts, a spirited composition of dragon's tails, and the striking plant called teasel, which flourished in the neighborhood of Claringford. For Mr. Lake had leanings towards paraphilitism, was thought by the best judges to show a wonderful amount of feeling for art, and just missed being selected for a prize. A girl with such a talent was naturally much appreciated in Mount Pleasant. She made the most charming design for Miss Marjoribanks' handkerchief, Lucilla, in Gothic characters enclosed in a wreath of forget-me-nots, skilfully combined with the sister leaves, which Rose took great pains to explain were so much better adapted to ornamentation than foliage of a less distinct character. And the young draftswoman was so charmed by Lucilla's enthusiastic admiration that she volunteered to work the design in the cupboard, which was a much more serious matter. This was the eye on Eve. This was the eve of Miss Marjoribanks' final departure from school. She was to spend a year abroad, to the envy of all whom she left behind. But for herself, Lucilla was not elated. She thought it very probable that she would ascend Mont Blanc, as far as the Grand Mullets at least, and, of course, in the spring, go to Vesuvius, having got through the Carnival and Misère and all the balls in Rome. But none of those things moved her out of her usual composure. She took it all in the way of business, as she had taken her French and her German, and her singing and her political economy. As she stepped into the steamboat at Dover, which was to convey her to scenes so new, Lucilla felt more and more that she who held the reorganization of society in Carlingford in her hands was a woman with a mission. She was going abroad as the heir apparent went to America and the Holy Land to complete her education and fit herself by an examination of the peculiarities of other nations for an illustrious and glorious reign at home. Take a break, take some tea. We will have a break once I run out of tea. But until then, Chapter 3, I really love this book. I love this book a lot. Also, on the account, I wonder if, because in the, I guess, 19th century in this case, they would have referred to subjects in school, like she says, her German or her French or her other words, as in you take ownership of the subject you're studying. And I find that maybe it's very good for like improving performance, perhaps, and like school subjects in general, being more invested in them, to where your quality is tied to your ownership of them, you know? So it could be quite nice. And like if they're not very good, then you know it's because they're in your ownership. Um,
So I wonder if that was an interesting way. Like, it's an interesting change in language. So I'm a bit curious about it, but also it's just really good to use in daily life, I think. Just like as a device. If you're struggling with like schoolwork or subjects in general, maybe thinking of them in this way could be helpful. Hmm. I love that book. It's so nicely written too. I wonder if when I'm done with it, I'll read more of her classics because she does have like a few. Um, Margaret Oliphant, the author. Well, nonetheless, chapter 3. It may be well to seize the opportunity of Miss Marjoribanks' travels, through which it is unnecessary to follow her, as they have nothing particular to do with the legitimate history of the great undertaking, to explain a little the state of affairs in Carlingford before this distinguished revolutionary began her labours. It is something like going back into the prehistoric period, the ages of the flint, which only ingenious quarrymen and learned geologists can elucidate. The record, the record can elucidate. To recall the social condition of the town before Miss Marjoribanks began her Thursday evenings, before St. Roque's Chapel was built or thought of, while Mr. Bury, the evangelical rector, was still in full activity, and before old Mr. Tufton and Salem Chapel, who sometimes drank tea at the rectory, and thus had a kind of clandestine entrance into the dim outskirts of that chaos which was then called society, had his first stroke. From this latter circumstance alone, the entirely disorganized condition of the affairs will be visible at a glance. It is true Mr. Vincent, who succeeded Mr. Tufton, was received by Lady Western in days when public opinion had made great advances, but then Lady Western was the most good-natured creature in the world, and gave an invitation when it happened to come into her hand, without the least regard for the consequences. And after all, Mr. Vincent was very nice-looking and clever, and quite presentable. Fortunately, however, the period to which we allude was prior to the entrance of Lady Western into Grange Lane. She was a very pretty woman, and knew how to look like a lady of fashion, which is always of importance. She was terribly inconsequent, as Miss Marjoribanks said, and her introductions were not in the least to be depended upon. She was indeed quite capable of inviting a family of retired drapers to meet the best people in Grange Lane, for no better reason than to gratify her protégés, which, of course, was a proceeding calculated to strike at the roots of all society. Fortunately for Claringford, its reorganization was in abler hands. Affairs were in utterly chaotic state at the period when this record commences. There was nothing which could be properly called a centre in the entire town. To be sure, Grange Lane was inhabited, as at present, by the best families in Claringford. But then, without organization, what good does it do to have a number of people together? For example, Mr. Bury was utterly unqualified to take any lead. Mr. Bury had been dead a long time, and the daughters were married, and the rector's maiden sister, who lived with him, was entirely of his own way of thinking, and asked people to tea parties, which were like Methodist class meetings, and were Mr. Tofton where Mr. Tufton was to be met with sometimes other dissenters, to whom Rector gave what he called the right hand of fellowship. But he never gave anything else to society, except weak tea and thin bread and butter, which was fair, the ladies said, which the gentlemen did not relish. "I never can induce Charles to go out to tea," said young Miss Woodburn, piteously. "He won't, and there is an end of it. After dinner he thinks of nothing but an easy chair and the papers. And my dear Miss Bury, what can I do?" "It is great pity, my dear, that your husband's carelessness should deprive you of the benefit of Christian conversation,"
But to be sure, it is your duty to stay with him, and I hope it will be made up to you at home, Miss Berry would say. As for the rector, his favorites were devoted to him, and as he always saw enough of familiar faces at his sister's tea parties, he took no account of the defaulters. Then there was Dr. Marjoribanks, who gave only dinners, to which, naturally, as there was no lady in the house, ladies could not be invited, and who, besides, was rather drawback than a benefit to society, since he made men quite intolerable, and filled them with such expectations in the way of cookery that they never were properly content with a good family dinner after. Then the ladies, from whom something might justly have been expected in the way of making society pleasant, such as Miss Sintram and Miss Woodburn, for example, who had everything they could desire and the most liberal housekeeping allowances, were either incapacitated by circumstances, which was a polite term in use in Carlingford and meant babies, or by character. Miss Woodburn liked nothing as well as to sit by the fire and read novels and take off her neighbours when anyone called on her. And of course, the lady who was her audience on an occasion left with the comfortable conviction that the next time she would be the victim, a circumstance which indeed did not make the offender unpopular, for there was very few people in Carlingford who could be amusing, even at the expense of their neighbours, but made it quite impossible that should ever do anything in the way of knitting people together and making a harmonious whole out of the scraps and fragments of society. As for Miss Chilly, she was old and had not energy enough for such an undertaking, and besides, she had no children and disliked fuss and trouble, and was of opinion that the colonel never enjoyed his dinner if he had more than 4 people to help him eat it. And in short, you might have gone over Grunge Lane house by house, finding a great deal of capital material, but without encountering a single individual capable of making anything out of it. Such was the lamentable condition at the moment this history commences of society in Claringford. And yet nobody could say that there were not very good elements to make society with. When you add to a man capable of giving excellent dinners like Dr. Marjoribanks, another man like young Mr. Cavendish and Miss Woodburn's brother, who was a wit and a man of fashion, and belonged to one of the best clubs in town, and brought down gossip with the bloom on it to Grunge Lane. And when you join to Miss Sintram, who was always so good and so much out of temper that it was safe to calculate on something amusing from her, the languid but trenchant humour of Miss Woodburn, not to speak of their husbands, who were perfectly available for the background, and all the nephews and cousins and grandchildren who constantly paid visits to old Mr. Western and Colonel Chilly, and the Browns, when they were at home, with their floating suit of admirers, and the young ladies who sang, and the young ladies who sketched, and the men who went out with the hounds when business permitted them, and the people who came about the town where there was an election, and the baristas who made the circuit, and the gay people who came to the races, not to not to speak of the varying chances of curates who could talk or play the piano. Curatus? I think it's like curators. It's an S for plural, is what I'm getting at. Who could talk or play the piano, with which Mr. Berry favoured his parishioners, for he changed his curates very often, and the occasional visits of the lesser country people and the country clergymen. It will be plainly apparent that all that was wanting to Claringford was a master hand to blend these different elements. There had even been a few feeble preliminary attempts at this great work, which had failed, as such attempts always fail when they are premature and when the real agent of the change is already on the way. But preparations and presentment had taken vague possession of the mind of the town, as has always been observed to be the case before a great revolution, or when a man destined to put his mark on his generation, as the newspapers say, is about to appear. To be sure, it was not a man this time, but Miss Marjoribanks, but the atmosphere thrilled and trembled to the advent of the new luminary, all the same. Yet, at the same time, the world of Claringford had not the least idea of the real quarter from which the sovereign intelligence, which was to develop and form in from chaos into order and harmony, was effectivement to come. Some people had hoped in Miss Woodburn before she fell into her present languor of appearance and expression, and a great many people hoped in Mr. Cavendish's wife if he married, as he was said to intend to do, for this gentleman, who was in the habit of describing himself, no doubt, very truthfully, as one of the Cavendishes, was a person of great consideration in Garage Lane. And some hoped in a new rector, for it was apparent that Mr. Bury could not last very long. Thus, with the ordinary short-sightedness of the human species, Claringford blinded itself and turned its eyes in every direction in the world rather than in that of the Swiss mountains, which were being climbed at that moment by a large and blooming young woman, with tawny short curls and alert, decided movements. So little do we know what momentous issues may hang upon the most possible accident. Had that energetic traveller slipped but an inch farther upon the Mer de Glance, had she taken that other step which was with difficulty persuaded not to take on the Vengeance Alp, there would have been an end of all hopes of social importance for Clangford. But the good fairies took care of Lucilla and her mission, and saved her from the precipice of the crevices. And instinctively the air at home got note of what was coming, and whispered the news mysteriously through the keyholes. Miss Marjoribanks is coming home, the unsuspecting male public said to itself as it returned from Dr. Marjoribanks' dinners with a certain distressing but mistaken presentiment that these delights were to come to an end. Oh, no. Miss Marjoribanks is coming home, the unsuspecting male public said to itself as it returned from Dr. Marjoribanks' dinners with a certain depressing but mistaken presentiment that these delights were to come to an end, and the ladies repeated the same piece of news, conjoining with it benevolent and intimations of their intention to call upon her and make the poor thing feel herself at home. Perhaps she may be amusing, Miss Woodburn was good enough to add. But these words meant only that perhaps Lucilla, who was coming to set them all right, was worthy of being placed in the Cetrus collection along with Miss Centrum and Miss Chilly. Thus, while the town writhed more and more for her great mission, and ignorant human creatures who were to be her subjects showed their usual blindness and ignorance, the time drew nearer and nearer for Miss Marjoribanks' return. One moment. Alright, the break is soon, but it is not yet upon us. So we go on to chapter 4. Chapter 4. My daughter. Sorry. My daughter is coming home, Nancy, said Dr. Marjoribanks. You will have to make preparations for her immediately. So far as I can make out from this letter, she will arrive tomorrow by 5:30 train. It also uses a tomorrow way of spelling it. I found that also to be the case in Sir Conan Doyle's books in the previous stream, so that's quite interesting that it's still consistent. His books are a bit more modern than this one, but it's still very cool. Well, sir, I don't know what voice to give Nancy. Oh well. Well, sir, said Nancy with the tone of a woman who makes the best of her misfortune, It ain't very. It ain't every young lady as would have the sense to fix an hour like that. Ladies is terrible tiresome in that way. They'll come in the middle of a day when a body don't know in the world what to have for 'em. Or they'll come at night when a body's tired and ain't got the heart to go into its supper. There was always a deal of sense in Miss Lucilla when she hadn't got nothing in her head. Just so, said Dr. Marjoribanks, who was rather relieved to have got through the announcement so easily. You will see that her room is ready and everything comfortable. And, of course, tomorrow she and I will dine alone. Yes, sir, said Nancy, but this assessment was not given in the decisive tone of a woman whose audience was over, and then she was seized with a desire to arrange a more satisfactory manner the cold beef on the sideboard. When she had secured this little interval for thought, she returned again to the table where her master ate his breakfast with a presentiment. If you please, sir, said Nancy, not to give you no vexation nor trouble, which everyone knows, as it has been the aim of my life to spare you, as has so much on your mind. But it's the best settle afore commencing, and then we needn't to have no heartburn. If you please, I am to take my orders of Miss Lucilla or of you, as I've always been used to. In the missus's time, said Nancy with modest confidence, as was good missus, and never gave no trouble as long as she had her soup and her jelly comfortable, as it was always you as said what there was to be for dinner. I don't make no objection to doing up a nice little luncheon for Miss Lucilla, and giving a little more thought now and again to the sweets. But it ain't my part to tell you, sir, as the ladies' taste, and more special a young lady's, ain't to be expected to be the same as yours, and mine, as has been cultivated like. I'm not one of the as likes contention, continued the domestic oracle, but I couldn't bear to see a good master put upon, and if it should be as Miss Lucilla sets her mind upon messes as ain't got no taste in them, and milk puddings and stuff like the most of the ladies, I'd just like to know out of your own mouths, afore the commencement, what I'm to do. Dr. Marjoribanks was so moved by this appeal that he laid down his knife and contemplated the alarming future with some dismay. It is to be hoped Miss Lucilla will know better, he said. She has a great deal of good sense, and it is to be hoped that she will be wise enough to consult the tastes of the house. But the doctor was not to be let off so easily. As you say, sir, everything's to be hoped, said Nancy steadily. But there's a many ladies as don't seem to be moved, sir, as don't seem to me to have no taste to their mouths. And it ain't as if it was a thing that could be left to hopes. Suppose as it comes to that, sir, what am I to do? Well, said the doctor, who was himself a little puzzled. You know Miss Lucilla is 19, Nancy, and my only child, and the natural mistress of the house. Sir, said Nancy austerely, them is things as it ain't needful to name, that ain't the question as I was asking. Suppose it as things come to such a point, what am I to do? Bless me, and it's 9:30, said the doctor, and I have an appointment. You can come just as usual when we are at breakfast. That will be the best way, he said as he went out at the door, and chuckled a little to himself when he felt he had escaped. Lucilla is her mother's daughter, it is true, he said to himself when he had got into the safe seclusion of his brougham, with a degree of doubt in his tone which was startling to say the least of it, from the lips of a medical man. But she is my child all the same, he added briskly, with returning confidence. And in this conviction there was something which reassured the doctor. He rubbed his hands as he bowed along to his appointment. And though within himself that if she turned out a girl of spirit, as expected, it would be good fun to see Lucilla struggle with Nancy for the veritable reins of government. If Dr. Marjoribanks had entertained any positive apprehensions that his dinners would be spoiled in consequence, his amusement would have come to an abrupt conclusion. But he trusted entirely in Nancy and a little in Lucilla, and suffered his long upper lip to relax at the thought without much fear. Her father had not returned from the labors of his long day when Lucilla arrived, but he made his last visit on foot in order to be able to send the Braham for her, which was a great thing for the doctor to do. There was indeed a mutual respect between the two, who were not necessarily to each other's comfort, it is true, as such near relations sometimes are, but who, at the same time, except on the sole occasion of Miss Marjoribanks' death, had never misunderstood each other, as sometimes happens. This time Miss Marjoribanks was rather pleased on the whole that the doctor did not come to meet her. At other times she had been a visitor, now she had come into her kingdom, and had no desire to be received like a guest. A sense of coming home, warmer than she remembered to have felt before, came into Lucilla's active mind as she stepped into the brougham. Not that the words bore any special tender meaning, notwithstanding that it was the desire of her heart, well known to all her friends, to live henceforth as a comfort to dear papa, but that now at last she was coming into her kingdom, and entering the domain in which she intended her will to be law. After living for a year with friends whose arrangements, much inferior to those which she could have made had she had the power, she had to acquiescence in, and whose domestic economy could only be criticized up to a certain point, it was naturally a pleasure to Miss Marjoribanks to feel that now at length she was emancipated, and at liberty to exercise her faculty. There were times during the past year when Lucilla had with difficulty restrained herself from snatching the reins out of the hands of her hosts, and showing them how to manage. But impatient as she was, she had to restrain herself and make the best of it. Now all the bondage was over. She felt like a young king entering in a secret of in secret a capital. She felt like a young king entering in secret a capital which awaits him with acclamations. Before she presented herself to the rejoicing public, there were arrangements to be made, and things to be done, and Miss Marjoribanks gave a rapid glance at the shops in Church Street as she drove past, and decided which of them were meant to honor with her presence. Which of them she meant to honor with her presence. When she entered the garden, it was with the same rapid glance of reorganizing genius that she cast her eyes around it, and still more decided was the look which she regained her own room, where she was guided by the new housemaid who did not know Miss Lucilla. Nancy, who knew no better, being, like most gifted persons, a woman of one idea. That's quite cool. Like Master of One. Hmm. Had established her young mistress in the little chamber which had been Lucilla's. Sorry. Had es- Nancy, who knew no better, being like most gifted persons, a woman of one idea, had established her young mistress in the little chamber which had been Lucilla's when she was a child. But Miss Marjoribanks, who had no sentimental notions about white dimity, shook her head at the frigid little apartment where, however, she was not at all sorry to be placed at present, for if Dr. Marjoribanks had been a man of the preeminent class, disposed to make all the preparations possible for his daughter and arrange elegant surprises for her, he would have thoroughly disgusted Lucilla, who was bent on making all the necessary improvements in her own person. When she went down to the drawing room to await her father, Miss Marjoribanks' look of disapprobation was mingled with so much satisfaction and content in herself that it was pleasant to behold. She shook her head and shrugged her shoulders as she paused in the center of the large faded room, where there was no light but that of the fire, which burned brightly, and kept up a lively play of glimmer and shadow in the tall glass over the fireplace, and even twinkled dimly in the three long windows where the curtains hung stiff and solemn in their daylight form. It was not an uncomfortable sort of big, dull, faded, respectable drawing room. And if there had been a family in it, with recollections attached to every old ottoman and easy chair, no doubt it would have been charming, but it was only a waste and howling wilderness to Lucilla. When she had walked from one end to the other and verified all the plans she had already long ago conceived for the embellishment of this inner court and centre of her kingdom, Lucilla walked with her unhesitating step to the fire, and took a match and lighted all the candles in large old-fashioned candlesticks, which had been flickering in the grotesque shadows all over the roof.
My, I was trying to scroll because I'm getting a little bit.
All over the roof. This proceeding threw a flood of light on the subject of her considerations, and gave Miss Marjoribanks an idea, in passing, about the best mode of lighting, which she afterwards acted upon with great success. She was standing in this flood of light, regarding everything around her with the eye of an enlightened critic and reformer, when Dr. Marjoribanks came in.
How close are the language? Oh, we're far. Okay. And we will have to take a break before the chapter is over, I think. Hmm. Actually, now is a good time. So Mr. Marjoribanks comes in, and then we get our thing. Dr. Marjoribanks. Alright, take a break. Get some tea. Hello. So break over. Continuing on, where we last left was that Miss Marjoribanks has surveyed her neighborhood and house, and has subsequently decided uh, a lot of things we will find out later. But for now, uh, Mr. and Dr. Marjoribanks is coming in. Perhaps there arose in the soul of the Doctor, a momentary thought that the startling amount of eclairage which he witnessed was scarcely necessary, for it is certain that he gave a momentary glance at the candles as he went up to greet his daughter, but he was far too well-bred a man to suggest such an idea at the moment. On the contrary, he kissed her with the sentiment of real pleasure, and owned to himself that if she was not a fool, and could keep her own department, it might be rather agreeable on the whole to have a woman in the house. The sentiment was not enthusiastic, and neither there were the words of his solution. "Well, Lucilla, this is you," said the moderate and unexcited father. "Well, Lucilla, this is you," said the moderate and unexcited father. "Yes, papa, it is me," said Miss Marjoribanks, "and very glad to get home." And so the two sat down and discussed the journey, whether she had been cold, and what state of the railway was in, until the doctor bethought himself that he had to prepare for the dinner. "Nancy is very punctual, and I'm sure you're hungry," he said, "as I'll go upstairs, with your permission, Lucilla, and change my coat." And with this the actual arrival terminated, and the new reign began. It was only next morning that the young sovereign gained any intimation of her future policy. She had naturally a great deal to tell the first night, and though it was exclusively herself, and her own adventures and achievements which Miss Marjoribanks related, the occasion of her return made her that sufficiently natural. And the doctor was not altogether superior to the natural prejudice which makes a man interested, even when they are not in themselves particularly interesting, in the doings of his children. She succeeded in doing what is certainly one of the first duties of a woman. She amused her father. She followed her, he followed her to the drawing room for a marvel, and took a cup of tea, though it was against his principles, and, on the whole, Lucilla had the satisfaction of feeling that she had made the conquest of the doctor, which, of course, was the grand and most essential preliminary. In the little interval which he spent over his claret, Miss Marjoribanks had succeeded in effecting another fundamental duty of the woman. She had, as she herself expressed it, harmonized the rooms by that simple method of rearranging half of the chairs and covering the tables with trifles of her own, a proceeding which converted the apartment from an abstract English drawing room of the old school into Miss Marjoribanks' drawing room, an individual spot of ground revealing something of the character of its mistress. The doctor himself was so moved by this that he looked vaguely around when he came in, as if a little doubtful where he was. But that might only be the effect of the sparkling mass of candles and the mantelpiece, which he was too well bred to remark upon the first night. But it was only in the morning that Lucilla unfolded her standard. She was down to breakfast, ready to pour out the coffee, before the doctor had left his room. He found her, to his intense amazement, seated at the foot of the table, in the place which he usually occupied himself, before the urn and the coffee pot. Dr. Marjoribanks hesitated for one momentous instant, stricken dumb by this unparalleled audacity. But so great was the effect of his daughter's courage and steadiness, that after that moment of fate he accepted the seat by the side, where everything was arranged for him, and to which Lucilla invited him sweetly, though not without a touch of mental perturbation, from the word perturbed, perturbation.
The moment he had seated himself, the doctor's eyes were opened to the importance of the step he had taken. "I'm afraid I have taken your seat, Papa," said Miss Marjoribanks, with ingenuous sweetness. "But then I should have had to move the urn and all the things. I thought you would not mind." The doctor said nothing but and even that in an undertone. But he became aware all the same that he had abdicated without knowing it, that the reins of the state had been smilingly withdrawn from his unconscious hands.
That's true. Honestly, I pull this sort of thing sometimes, not for the sake of like what she's doing, I suppose, but like what is happening is like a subtly reining things in to where you need them, I suppose, a little bit of the function. And while the coffee pot is there and also somewhat an excuse, uh, you can kind of like it's a guiding technique, I suppose. Anyway, fair enough. Fair game.
When Nancy made her appearance, the fact became still more apparent, though still in the sweetest way. "It is so dreadful to think Papa should have been bothered with all these things so long," said Miss Marjoribanks. "After this, I am sure you and I, Nancy, can arrange it all without giving him the trouble. Perhaps this morning, Papa, as I am a stranger, you will say if there is anything you would like, and then I should have time to talk it all over with Nancy and find out what is best." And Lucilla smiled so sweetly upon her two amazed subjects that the humor of the situation caught the fancy of the doctor, who had a keen perception of the ridiculous. He laughed out, much to Nancy's consternation, who was standing by in open-eyed dismay. "Very well, Lucilla," he said. "You shall try what you can do. I dare say Nancy will be glad to have me back again before long. But in the meantime, I'm quite content that you should try." And he went off laughing to his Brougham, but came back again before Lucilla could take Nancy in hand, who was an antagonist more formidable. "I forgot to tell you," said the doctor, "that Tom Marjoribanks is coming on circuit, and that I have asked him to stay here, as a matter of course. I suppose he'll arrive tomorrow. Goodbye till evening." This, though Dr. Marjoribanks did not in the least intend it, struck Lucilla like a Parthian arrow, and brought her down for the moment. "Tom Marjoribanks!" she ejaculated in a kind of horror. "Of all people in the world, and this moment!" But when she saw the open eyes and rising color of Nancy, the young dictator recovered herself. For a conqueror in the first moment of his victory has need to be wary. She called Nancy to her in the most affectionate tones as she finished her breakfast. I can't tell if she doesn't like him or does like him. No, in a kind of horror. I again, that doesn't tell me a lot actually. I can't tell if this is like a good thing or not. Oh. Right. "I sent Papa away," said Miss Marjoribanks, "because I want to have a good talk with you, Nancy. I want to tell you my object in life. It is to be a comfort to Papa. Ever since poor Mamma died, that is what I have been thinking of. And now I have come home. And I have made up my mind that he is not to be troubled with about anything. I know what a good, faithful, valuable woman you are, I assure you. You need not think me a foolish girl who is not able to appreciate you." "The dinner was charming last night, Nancy," said Lucilla with much feeling. "And I never saw anything more beautifully cooked than Papa's cutlets today."
I do. You know how earlier I mentioned about her improving because she talks so much? I do definitely see it here. Because the way that she was written at the first was over dramatization, and the way she's written now is almost natural. Like, you can really see the change, I think.
"Miss Lucilla," I might say, as I am very glad I have pleased you, said Nancy, who was not quite conquered as yet. She stood very stiffly upright by the table and maintained her integrity. Master is particular, I don't deny, continued the Prime Minister, who felt herself dethroned. I've always done my best to go in with his little fancies, and I don't mean to say as it isn't right and natural as you should be the missus. But I ain't used to have ado with ladies, and that's the truth. Ladies are stingy in a many things, as a soul of good dinner to them as knows. I may be valuable, valuable or not, it ain't for me to say, but I'm not one as can always be kept to a set figure in my gravy beef, and my bacon, and them sorts of things. As for the butter, I don't know as I could give anybody an idea. I ain't one as likes changes, but I can't abide to be kept to a set figure. And that's the chief thing, Miss Lucilla, as I have to say. And quite reasonable, too, said Miss Marjoribanks. You and I will work perfectly well together, Nancy. I'm sure we have both the same meaning, and I hope you don't think I'm less concerned about dear Papa than about the gravy beef. He must have been very desolate with no one to talk to, though he has been so good and kind and self-sacrificing in leaving me to get every advantage. But I mean to make up to him now I've come home. Yes, miss, said Nancy, somewhat mystified. Not but what master has had his little parties now and again, to cheer him up a bit. And I make bold to say, miss, as I have heard compliments, which it was Thomas that brought him downstairs, as might go nigh to turn a body's head if it was vanity as I was thinking of. But I ain't one as thinks of anything but the comfort of the family, said Nancy, yielding in spite of herself to follow the leadings of the higher will, in presence of which she found herself. But I'm always the one as does my best, Miss Lucilla, if I ain't worried nor kept to a set figure with my gravy beef.
Hmm, I wonder if you guys have some kind of what the background sound is. No, I think we're good actually. Okay, great. Hmm.
I have heard of Papa's dinners, said Lucilla graciously. And I don't mean to let down your reputation, Nancy. Now we are two women to manage everything. We ought to do still better. I have two, three things in my head that I will tell you after, but in the meantime, I want you to know that the object of my life is to be a comfort to poor Papa. And now, let us think what we had better have for dinner, said the new sovereign. Nancy was so totally unprepared for this manner of dethronement that she gave in like her master. She followed Miss Marjoribanks humbly into those details, in which Lucilla speedily proved herself a woman of original mind, and powers quite equal to her undertaking. The doctor's formidable housekeeper conducted her young mistress downstairs afterwards and showed her everything with the meekness of a saint. Lucilla had won a second victory still more exhilarating and satisfactory than the first. For, to be sure, it is no great credit to a woman of 19 to make a man of any age throw down his arms, but to conquer a woman is a different matter, and Lucilla was thoroughly sensible of this difference. Now, indeed, she could feel with the sense of reality that her foundations were laid. Miss Marjoribanks had enough of occupation for the day and for many days, but her mind was little distracted by her father's parting intelligence. She had, besides, a natural desire to view the country she had come to conquer. When she had made a careful supervision of the house and shifted her own quarters into the pleasantest of the two best bedrooms, and concluded that the little bare dimity chamber she had occupied the previous night was quite good enough for Tom Marjoribanks, Lucilla put on her hat and went out to make a little reconnaissance. She walked down to the spot where Roque's now, St. Roque's now stands, on her own side of the carriage lane, and up on the other side into the carriage George Street. surveying all the capabilities of the place with a rapid but penetrating glance.
Okay, I've been thinking in the background of this while I'm reading because I can do that because I've got great and amazing brain. That what it is that she's done when she was, so to speak, conquering the two previously, and like I can see the mechanics themselves, right? Um, you don't become an opposition to the people already there, obviously, because then they're going to opposition defy you for no particular reason. If you want the best for everybody, then let them know you want the best for everybody and make them feel heard, and that kind of puts you in that, I suppose. That's not the thing I'm interested in. She had done so very quickly. Well, not even very quickly, that's not an issue. Um, but more so the decisiveness with which she has done so. Uh, Somewhat admirable, I believe, because like if you come to a place that you're not the in charge of, it's common to take hesitance or look to people already there for guidance, and she has done neither of those two things, while also not mm, like rubbing gears with them, because she's not afraid to rub gears with them, and that's, I think, a strong part of it. So there's that. Dr. Marjoribanks' house could not have been better placed as a strategic position, commanding as it did all Grange Lane, of which it was, so to speak, the key, and yet affording a base of communication with the profaner public, which Miss Marjoribanks was wise enough to know a leader of society should never ignore completely. For, indeed, one of the great advantages of the brilliant position is that it gives a woman a right to be arbitrary and to select her materials according to her judgment. It was more from a disinclination to repeat herself than any other motive that Lucilla, when she had concluded this preliminary survey, went up into the Grove Street, meaning to return home that way. And that hour in the morning the sun was shining on the little gardens on the north side of the street, which was the plebeian side, and as it was the end of October and by no means warm, Lucilla was glad to cross over and continue her walk. Hmm. Sorry, where was I? I lost my place a little bit. An hour in the morning, the sun was shining. To continue her walk by the side of those little enclosures, where the struggling crescentiums propped each other up, and the cheerful Miss Tremillion's daisies made the best of it in the sunshine that remained to them. Miss Marjoribanks had nearly reached Salem Chapel, which pushed itself forward amid the cozy little line of houses, pondering in her mind the unexpected hindrance which was about to be placed in her triumphant path in the shape of Tom Marjoribanks, when that singular piece of good fortune occurred to her which had so much effect upon her career in Clingford. Such happy accidents rarely happen except to great generals or heroes of romance, and it would have been, perhaps, a presumption on the part of Lucilla to place herself conspicuously in either of these categories. The fact is, however, that this eventful moment she was walking along under the shade of her pretty parasol, not expecting anything, but absorbed in many thoughts, and a little cast down in her expression of success by a consciousness that this unlucky cousin would insist upon making love to her, and perhaps even, as she herself expressed it, saying the words, which it had taken all her skill to prevent him from saying before. Not that he would have anyone believe that lovemaking in the abstract was disagreeable to Miss Marjoribanks, but she was only 19 and well off and good looking, and with plenty of time for all that. At the present moment she had other matters of more importance in hand. It was well occupied with these reflections, and within these doors of Salem Chapel, in the front of little garden, where a great deal of mignonette had run to seed,
And where's the Michaelmas? 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 Michaelmas daisies had taken full possession, but Lucilla was roused suddenly out of her musings. The surprise was so great that she stopped short and stood still before the house in the extremity of her astonishment and delight. Who could it be that possessed that voice which Miss Marjoribanks felt by instinct was the very one saying wanting a round, full, delicious contralto, precisely adapted to supplement without supplanting her own high-pitched and much cultivated organ? She stopped short before the door and made a rapid observation even in the first moment of her surprise. The house was not exactly like the other humble houses in Grove Street. Two little blank squares hung in the center of each of the lower windows revealed to Lucilla's educated eye the existence of so much feeling for art as can be satisfied with the transparent porcelain version of famous Madonna. And she could even catch a glimpse, though the curtains of the bathroom, which, contrary to the wont of humble gentility in Claringford, were well drawn back, and allowed the light to enter fully, of the glimmer of gilt picture frames. And in the little garden in front, half buried among the mignonette, were some remains of plaster casts, originally placed there for ornament, but long since cast down by rain and neglect. Lucilla made her observations with promptitude of an accomplished warrior, and before the second bar of the melody indoors was finished, had knocked very energetically. "Is Miss Lake home?" she asked, with confidence of the little maid-servant who opened the door to her. And it was thus that Lucilla made her first bold step out of the limits of Grange Lane, for the good of society, and secured at once several important personal advantages, and the great charm of those Thursday evenings which made so entirely revolution in the taste and ideas of Claringford. Great. Lovely. Now we are at chapter 5, which is also where we shall end today. And we shall start that again next week. This will take quite a few installments, but I hope and trust that you have enjoyed it. I hope you have a good evening, and